So I should thank Hans again. I said a lot of very to-the-point things, and of course, as he mentioned himself, and he himself is the student program is the pride and joy, was it, of Johannes, who was a very how to call this, fundamental part in making it, but it's of course also the students that make it themselves. And I'm very happy to see that a very significant fraction, starting at Hans, of our audience are actually either current or former students of the NOT, and they are very I think that's a very good part of NOT in general. So let's see if all this works. Okay, it's fantastic. So yeah, why this talk? That's always a good question, but also why the symposium? So what is the objective? I think Hans already rather well expressed this, but it actually also says in the text, presenting on the webpage you can see this, and also presenting in the call for participation, is the idea is to think about the future. What is the role? What can we do with the NOT? And the longer term use and operations. I will give you a bit of history, but it will go very fast. I went actually too fast. So in the framework of the coming, the presentation discussion, this will hopefully a bit be a combination of the two. My talk will be longer than programmed, I think, but that's because I talk too much. No, because I try to cover as much as possible the background. So what I'm trying to provide is not so much a status report. It is a status report, but it's a bit also the framework in which we should think about the future of the telescope, how to operate it, etc. So I hope to provide you some basic data so you have an idea of how things are running. So you can think about things. So the things to think about are, how do we operate the telescope? I mean, do we want, for instance, you want Q mode, you want visitor mode, you want both, education was mentioned, these are very important things. How do you want to do this? Also in the past, but in the future, and this has evolved with time with the NOT, of course. How do you support the operations? Astronomical support, technical support, astronomy support could be from students, things like that. What kind of observing runs you have. You could even do a Q mode, etc. And of course, a rather fundamental thing about, and Hans also mentioned it, how do we fund the telescope? I mean, you need all these things, require money, unfortunately. So there's a combination of the things. I mean, how do you operate? In what way do you operate it and support it, and how do you fund that? So these are very important things to think about. So as I said before, a bit of history. Way back, NOTSA, I mean, I will jump through this quickly, but actually when I was preparing for this talk, I went to look at some, I remembered a meeting we had in Aarhus, which is actually precisely 10 years ago, about the NOT and the projects to do, etc. So this was actually a very natural thing. So to a certain extent I've tried to look to also represent how NOT is now, how it is a bit different from 10 years ago. And there are a lot of levels this has changed. So as I already mentioned, where NOTSA used to be the scientific association that ran it. Here's some basic data. What is maybe interesting to point out is these things. This was all written in agreement. There was a very clear division between funding, etc. This then changed about, say, 10 years ago. And the two fundamental things is that the funding changed from between the different countries, the amounts, and also that from then on, basically observing time was allocated according to contribution. So you had how to call this, a relation between those two, which before that wasn't. Yeah, I hope you hear me well enough. So I'm not. So new NOT, the new structure, as Hans also pointed out, this is really new, and we were talking about 2 years ago. That is was in place. The organizational structure is a bit different, or to a certain extent. This is also how to call this, transparent to the user. I mean, being at the telescope, this is in itself doesn't have any direct effect, but it's a fundamental background to it. One change was, of course, that Sweden left NOTSA and the organization, and to a certain extent we got the University of Stockholm back, but that is also just a member for the time being. The same still holds as for the shares of observing time, except that the contributions or distribution has completely changed. I think it's fair to say that Finland and Denmark, both as co-owners, are also the main senior partners, if you want, and Norway and Sweden are, say, or Stockholm, sorry, and Iceland, University of Iceland, to be correct as well, are the junior partners. For the rest, from the executive body, the formation legally is different, but the overall idea of having a council, a director, and an observing time allocation committee, sorry, is a bit the same as before. Okay. However, as I said, when I prepared this, I came across this talk from 10 years ago, and I started to look at the differences. So we have already organizational differences. You also have budget differences. Two things. One is, well, this is a distribution. This is 2012 approximately. I just took the average of a few years. All these numbers here are ballpark numbers. They are not precise, but they're fairly precise. So you see here a lot of colors and different types of contributions, but actually only two appear. One is the national contribution from the different countries, and then external contribution. This is actually Opticon. So you have a big chunk is national contributions from the different research councils, and then there's some external contribution. If you look now, say this year, it's very different. Apart from that, the budget is somewhat reduced. You also see that the national contributions is a much smaller part. So now we have what we are user contributions from some of the users if we do things in service mode and stuff like that. We have some other contributions. We have support from Norforsk in the NOTSA Science Center. There is also EDA support in other places. Then we have external contributions. Again, this is Opticon, but we actually also now have KTech Infra. That's another Horizon 2020 transnational access program. And we actually also have external projects, like in this case, as Frederik Kubing will later also talk about, we have quasar monitoring being done really on a close to nightly basis. So these are external contributions to the budget, and there are also some other income that is actually, we do some technical support for the solar telescope here, Swedish solar telescope. But as you can see, what is maybe most important there is that beyond the national contributions, which of course also not set in stone, we have a lot of variable contributions, which are more than a quarter of all the contributions we have. So these are, well, opportunities and also dangers at the same time. So something to think about. There are other ways of how to call this, finding funds, and also the funds can be related to different ways of operation. I mean, you might change operation in such a way that you attract more users. Okay. What has changed? Also the staff. There used to be a director, there's still one. So this is basically compared to, say, 10 years ago. Astronomy support, there were 4 staff. Oh, sorry. Something went wrong there. I went the wrong way. Sorry. I wanted to do this. Anyway, so in this time, 10 years ago, it was actually Johannes that was director, and I was one of those 4. And we had typically 4 or 5 astronomers. So we go now. We have still a director, but that's me now, so I'm no longer in here. And also one of our staff is now working around half-time, so we have 2.5 where it used to be 4. However, we are extremely lucky and happy that through our agreement we have with the IEC to operate the telescope at the observatory. There's also an IEC Nordic support astronomer. Rasasi is sitting somewhere, I think. Anyway, so she actually also helps very much in this part. So in that sense, it is we have lost less than it could have been. So that was very positive, I must say. And I'm very happy with the arrangement we have. So at the same time, we also have expanded our student group. We are typically 6 or 7 students. That varies a bit. At the moment, we have 6. So, and we just the latest victim. Sorry, the latest addition to our student group is in the audience. So we're getting new ones all the time, so which is very good. They don't know what they're getting into. So no, it's really nice. So anyway, so there are changes. Also on software side, we used to have 4 staff members there, and this actually has changed. What we do. Sorry, maybe go back. The 4 parts are actually really nicely distributed among the different tasks we have. The telescope control system, observing system, data flow system, and system managing. I think that is broadly the 4 tasks we have in software. And this is more or less, you can translate it to 4 people. Of course, there's a lot of overlap. So maybe a more fundamental thing with Node, we are such a small thing that everything is shared in task. I mean, you do not have a person to empty the dustbin. I mean, whoever is there should do it. And that can also be basic tasks like whatever, filling nitrogen, changing optical elements, whatever. This is everybody is multitasking, because I mean we have very few people, and there are, as Hans said, there are 365 actually nights that we need to operate. So, okay. So one of the things we there, as one of our staff members left, we have done this system managing, and that is outsourced actually to Sergio, who is a fantastic contribution to our staff, I must say. I'm very happy, but clearly that also should be done in a more proper way, and we hopefully can make this a more how to call this, a permanent situation. But that, of course, depends on money. 2 more things. Electromechanical support. We have actually only 1 engineer, 1 technician, and 1 mechanic we used to have 10 years ago. The mechanic, Peter Brandt, or as we call him, Pedro, because we have more Peters. He actually retired a few years ago. We actually recently had a few retirement party finally, because he retired during COVID, which was actually a very nice, typical not thing, not party. Last but not, so we have only 1 engineer and 1 technician. That also means many of the tasks that Pedro used to do are now spread out over other people again. This put pressure on the staff. And administration, we have 2 persons that at least on the not task they work half-time, but as you also noticed, they were here yesterday and they were here today, so they definitely do their fair share of work. I think that is a very common not thing. But just realize that what you see here, this is our staff. And so you talk about 11, 12, 13 people, and some of them work half-time, so, and we work 365, sorry, we operate 365 nights a year. Okay, good. I'll give you a bit more background. So these are more things you will know typically. So we always have, as for instrumentation, standcam and VS. They're always standby in principle. 95% of the time they're available, I would say, if not longer. And then in principle we have one of those instruments in Cassegrain focus. So Alphos, NotCam. They are the main working horses, I would say, in that sense. Mosca, we provided, but it's actually very little used. And then we also actually have 2 visitor instruments, if you want. Sovin, which the good old Sovin, I would say, that still has its specific contributions to make. I see Yuri here as well, one of the users. And we have what used to be actually Turpool. We nowadays have a more modern, safe version of it, I would say. It's Dipol, and I'm very happy that André is here also to present data from this instrument, which is very nice. So this is what we provide to people as for instrumentation. Then proposal system, well, maybe I can go rather quickly through this. We have record proposals, call every semester. There's an integrated proposal system, and that's what our database persons do. Peter has done a lot of work in this. That includes instrument setup, contact, automatic emails, end-of-night reports. This is all automated. This is also a fundamental task for us to automate things, because otherwise, I mean, you have people that need to do things, which is, there is only so many hours in the day. We provide fast-track proposals, so that's short programs. You can apply for it anytime, and in principle, and quickly you get a reply. And we do, in principle, those observations, those fast-track proposals in dedicated nights. That's actually through a database proposal system. Okay. Next step, observing system. So we have observing block system. I would say that a large majority of our instruments and observing modes are are now accessible through our observing block system, which helps in a lot of things. You have full target observation, information. You have observing scripts that are automatically generated based on the information you provide, sets keywords, etc. Again, this is a way of automating and optimizing things, so you don't also need to type the whole time on the keyboard. Automated data processing. I mean, that is, I would say, much more something under development than the previous part. It is much less complete. We do have some look reduction things. We also have, for instance, VS2, which does a more full reduction of the data, basically automatically. Quite often, you can actually use those data to publish. And of course, that is nowadays it's normal to have instruments where you have pipelines. So pipelines, and certainly, well, both Kikuk to just check the quality of data, but also pipelines are very fundamental in being able to use the data optimally, and in the end, getting to publications. So yeah, the data archive, that is definitely something that could be improved, and especially as part of the Not Science Center, the Northwest Grant, we hope to also develop that. And there are more initiatives to get this better, so it's easier to access the data, etc. Now, what the system we have is certainly not optimal and still requires some manual work. So that is certainly one of the places where things can be improved. Think about virtual observatories. And that is directly linked to things like pipelines. So these things are related. Okay, calibration archive is also part of this. So last but not least, what we provide from an observing system is remote observing. It's basically primarily for courses. So we do have a system from which you basically, well, in certain cases it's even from the kitchen. As I see Hakon here, who once observed from his kitchen using Mosca on Christmas Eve, I think. That is already quite a few years ago, but in principle, you can operate the telescope, the observing system from virtually anywhere. We use VNC, and you can, well, it has a lot of feels to it. Of course, it's not the same as being at the telescope, and as Hans also pointed out, a very important thing is the direct use and that people learn. And nowadays, if you're a student in most observatory, you're not even allowed to get close to the telescope, let alone to touch it. So I think that's I mean, I've been myself a student, not as, well, even earlier than Hans, actually, at the end of the 80s at ESO and La Silla, and at that time you were still allowed to touch telescopes, and that was, it helps a lot, so you learn a lot. You know, otherwise you just get flat field data and you don't know where they're wrong, and what is a flat field in the first place. So. Anyway, and what can go wrong with it. So next up, observing modes. I would say rather standard. We have visitor mode, we have service mode. It's maybe good to stress what our definitions are. For us, service mode is basically you have a normal observing run, and except that there is no visitor, we do it. That is what we call service mode. We have monitoring programs. That is also something we do. This is maybe a step further than service mode. So it's like a regular run, except then made up in chunks. So typically spread out over a semester. It could be even semesters and years. So you want to follow a large, long period binary. You want to observe it once every week, or you want to look at quasars and monitor brightness. You want to look every night. You can also do that. So these are typical examples of monitoring programs. Target opportunity programs as well. That's what it says. Something suddenly a source appear, or could be in brightness, or because it's moving and suddenly you see it because before it was too far away. All those things generate the need to react quickly, but you don't know in advance. So suddenly, of course, a supernova is a standard example. It appears, you want to look at it, you want to take spectra, you want to look at the brightness, you want to see how it evolves. And target opportunity are there very, fundamental, I would say. I would also say that especially these last two things, monitoring programs and target opportunity programs are certainly, I would say, the strength of NOT. This is something where we clearly stand out. We can and do react quickly. We do provide flexibility, so you basically can try to get the most optimal observations. I mean, And well, maybe one thing to mention, because I like to mention this, when the first gravitational wave counterpart was observed, there was only one telescope on La Palma that looked at it. So, and we ended up in the paper. So, with NOTSA, by the way. So, there are very good things to this. I mean, it just shows you what the benefits can be of that. Okay, well, yeah, a slight thing to add. We have this a bit of two kinds. Quite often there are the target opportunities that are urgent but not so urgent. So it takes weeks to brighten and months to decay. You can observe it today, tomorrow, or in a few days. So we have many dedicated nights set aside to that, which are Nordic service nights, in which we can do those target opportunities. So you can request those things, but they are only limited to those nights. But we have a very big fraction of those nights. Okay, and the other one is to say that the true target, the true TOs, if you want what we call hard TOs, at any time you can call for them. You say, now, we need it as soon as possible. And we even allow, in principle, the possibility to override ongoing observations. But it's seldom that we get to that state. Okay. Educational programs, of course, a very other important way of using the telescope. And we will hear more about this actually on Thursday, right? So, and there we provide both on-site courses, of course. With COVID, this has been more complicated, but in principle, we provide in our service building a setup fairly similar to what you see here. These kind of tables we have in our service building. You can set them up and you can run it as a class and next to the telescope. And of course, we have a lot of remote courses. But as I said before, you will hear more about it on Thursday. So operations, well, very fundamental thing. Downtime. We actually have a database since October 2006, where we keep this automatically up to date. We could go also back further, but then I would have to look at papers. So this is a fairly non-instructive plot, I know. These are the variations with time. So you see all the months between October 2006 and March, actually, because that's the last full month I checked. On the left, you have the downtime in the weather. On the right, due to technical faults. Basically, the way to read this, anything which has two decimals before the dot are weather downtime, and anything which only have one is technical. One thing to note, this one is actually the highest. This was the volcano together with November. So this last November was really bad. Which was partly, the weather is always worse in November, but it was also the volcano that made us have to close quite a few nights because of dust and stuff like that. The good thing about the single-digit peaks is that you see very few of them. There's here one and there's here one, and most of the rest is here in the noise, if you want. There are actually really true the numbers coming out of it, so you can see the number of dark hours we had, much was lost due to weather and due to faults. So if you subtract the weather from this, you can see how many hours we have been, how to call this, sorry that you might not hear me so well. How many hours we actually have been observing, which are quite a few 100,000 hours. So there are also numbers connected to it, which is that the technical downtime is, and we're talking about now 16 years of data is 0.8%, and the weather is 24. Those numbers I can vary a bit if I select subsets of a number of years, but it's not much that it changes. It can be 0.7 or 0.9 if you want. It can be 23% or 25, but those numbers are rather well defined on any level of a few years. So that is a rather basic input. So how do we use the telescope? So we have, of course, as I said before, we have our workhorses, AlphaScan NotCam for say the optical and the infrared. That is imaging, low resolution spectroscopy. And VS has come up also around this time, actually, just before 2012. We started to, it was moved to a separate building. It was in a stable environment, etc., with the fiber running from the telescope, and that it was really used at the time. Of course, then we also had things like Kepler, which actually stimulated the use. And as you can see, they already take, say, 80% of all the time. Now we jump forward to 10 years later. actually the use of VS is a bit down because there's less of these kind of things. What you can do also, the kind of things they want from high resolution spectroscopy on sources is no longer something that VS directly provides, but we are working on it. And you can also see that well, NotCam stays nearly the same. Alphos is more used. That has to do with target opportunity programs, and you see now actually that those three are already taking up 90% of all the time we're doing. So it's a very well-defined thing what we do. So the support we provide, again, 2012 approximately. So that's much more classical. We had typically 110 nights per semester. By the way, important numbers are per semester. So where you typically have observing runs of 3 nights. So a third of those nights we would have to provide astronomy support. And that's a very important thing to remember. What kind of service do you need to provide? What kind of support that requires people? Service and technical nights, so that is 65 nights. That's a bit a mix of things. We are fairly flexible in how you use those time, because that also allows for flexibility in the use of those nights. So beyond technical things, that includes normal service mode. As I said before, you just do an observing run and we execute it. We have monitoring programs. At that time we were talking about, say, together it's like 30 nights with something like 10 programs we are doing. So that's a significant amount, but it's not so much. And then last but not least, we had typically observing courses which were already then going on. I mean, we're talking well over 10, 15 years ago we were doing those observing courses. So now, I hope you can keep track of this. I will just jump, this lower part will jump from 10 years ago to now. You see a number of significant changes. Nearly half as many observing runs are now done in visitor mode, much less. There's a much more service observing. Service mode, that is regular observing programs that are done by that, are not the same as before. If you look at the numbers, that doesn't change. It's the only number that doesn't change. But you see that monitoring programs and TO programs now together form 70 nights a semester. Think about that. More than 1/3 of our programs are monitoring TO programs, and then we're talking about 25 programs in total. So what used to be like 30 is now 70. What used to be 10 is now 25. Last but not least, we also have more observing courses. Basically all with the exception of Iceland, all the partners have courses running at the NOT each year. So I think an important thing to learn here from the fact is that service nights, that means we do it, that means as this used to be 65 nights, and now we have 105 nights. These are all things that need to be supported and executed, which is also why development of software, etc., is also very important. But again, that requires people. Okay. What does this all bring? I mean, we have all these nice programs, your observing system, you have instrumentation you can use, etc., and then you also get to publications. So this is latest chart, including last year. Maybe to point out, Johannes became director here. I here, so for me it was much easier. That is very relative. So you see clearly a change. This at least partly has to do, of course, with the way the telescope was operating, etc., and also VS has contributed there. But you see a very clear increase, and then also very well-defined plateau at which we currently are. So I can give you some numbers there. So we already, and we're actually getting close to 2200. The latest count of, so I think it's now 2180 or so, something around that. 50 of those are actually. So this over the whole. This is to the best of our knowledge actually. Of course we might have missed some papers, but there will not be many. Nowadays it's easy to search. This includes 50 nature and science papers. We're talking about main journal. I don't include nature or astronomy or whatever, but really truly main journal publications. You can look at the publication rate, especially the last 10 years or 11 years by now actually, and we are nearly precisely 100 articles per year. And although it fluctuates from year to year, there are 2 nature papers and or science papers every year. So I think it's at least testimony both to the telescope, but I would specifically say the users, because you use this telescope, you do the good work with this, and you actually, so it's also very satisfying for us because it is well taken, used, I would say. Thesis, this is completely, just because I have the numbers, this is completely incomplete, I'm absolutely sure. For one, I already talked to Jesus about the thesis that maybe might be done actually, well, will have been done at the IAC in Spain, and they certainly do not all included in this, but we're all talking about say 100 master theses and 100 VSc theses at least that not has contributed over its lifetime. So I think that is impressive as well, even without having the precise numbers. So yeah, I'm not sure if you can read what it says on the top. I realize this might be a bit too, at least from this particular perspective, I can hardly read it. But anyway, future instrumentation, to a certain extent, things do stay the same in standby mode, except that we are also trying to get VS to work better. Specifically, we are talking about radio velocity stability. You both will hear something from Lars Boeghaven about that. And also our new student, he is only arrived yesterday, but he already has been given tasks, so which is very good. So he will actually be looking at how we might improve stability and getting this to better work. We can do more planetary stuff, for instance. So yeah, and then in principle, instead of various instruments, we would normally have one instrument. I stress it is not per definition meant that this will always occupy Cassegrain or that you would never dismount it. There's certainly possibility and room for instruments like, for instance, dipole that could also be used in the future. There's a priori nothing against it, but in principle this would be the normal setup. So I call it a mini imaging X-shooter. It's derived from X-shooter, which is on the VLT and extremely successful, I would say. A bit more details. So you have the telescope is above. The light gets in from here. So here you have the adapter with STANCAM and VS if you want, and then here you get the instrument. So there's a visual imager. There's a near-infrared imager, so the light is either diverted here or it goes there, or the light goes straight through. On purpose, I write the spectrograph at 2/3 arms, but the next talks might elucidate a bit on this part. Anyway, so these are just general information about what you have. You have different sets of filters. You might notice also that the image sizes are fairly similar to what we currently have for ALPHOSC and NOTCAM. And then if you go through, you have, in principle, single slit spectrograph that would cover the whole optical and near-infrared range until the K-band, the middle of that. What is important to note is that this basically covers and actually somewhat improves, certainly on the spectroscopic side, on what NOTCAM and ALPHOSC are delivering now. And those two image instruments, as I showed before, they already cover like 70% of all the time we are operating. So that would be would be our major workhorse together with VS. I will leave it to future talkers later to say more about the details. So yeah, as I started with what was the objective, both of the symposium and also maybe of the talk. I will want to provide a bit of a background that you can have some framework to think about what you can do in the future. So there's of course also priorities and where do you want to go. So in principle these priorities are very simple, rather straightforward. There is, I think, also very little discussion about what would be our prime priorities, and this has also been agreed by the NOT Council. So this is, I would say, a not wide thing. Our first priority is, of course, keeping the telescope running. Basic technical support, greasing wheels and stuff like that. And of course, safety is a very fundamental thing in there. It's simple. I mean, nobody has to think about this. The second thing is actually to a certain extent also fairly obvious. You want to make sure that telescope runs tonight, but also that it can keep on running. That does require, for instance, upgrades. New things become obsolete. Operating system need to be updated, etc. I mean, there are always standard upgrade things you need to do. You cannot just leave a telescope and we don't operate with the same software, the same hardware for a lot of electronics from 30 years ago. You need to change them. Sometimes otherwise you cannot get spares, for instance. They are a fundamental thing. So that's the next thing to thing. And then I think completely in the idea or the whole, I'm trying to find the right word, but so what is the basic driving thing in NOT? One of its fundamental, I would say, objectives is the student program. And so beyond purely having the telescope running, that is the next thing. One way or the other, being able to train students, give courses, etc. Keeps on being a very important thing. And the last two are basically the next steps that we could do. One is the amount of support we provide. I mean, if you come, how much do you do? That is somewhat tied in. All those things are to a certain extent tied in, but that's tied in with the student program. As you know, they play a very fundamental role also in the operational side. Last but not least, of course, if we have the money and the resources, then the best we want is develop things, making the telescope and the instrument better, so we can use it in the best possible way. Hans already standing up, so thank you for listening, and hopefully you have a very good and fruitful symposium or workshop. Thank you.